The night was cold, but inside the Grand Meridian Hotel, everything glowed with warmth and wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The floors were polished so bright you could see your reflection in them, and everywhere you looked, there were people dressed in clothes that cost more than most people earn in a month. Elena Vasquez walked through the crowd carrying a silver tray loaded with champagne glasses. Her black uniform was pressed and clean. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her shoes were uncomfortable, but she had learned to ignore the pain a long time ago. She had learned to ignore a lot of things. Tonight was a big event, a birthday party for a man named Richard Hartwell. He was 70 years old, retired now. But in his younger days, he had been one of the most powerful music producers in the country. He had discovered singers, pianists, violinists. He had made careers with a single phone call. People in the music world still spoke his name with respect. His wife, Margaret, had planned everything for months. The flowers, the food, the guest list. She wanted it to be perfect. And so far, it was. The guests were laughing, drinking, enjoying themselves. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Everything was going exactly as planned. Elena moved between the guests like a shadow. That was her job. To be there when needed, and invisible when not. She had been doing this work for 3 years now, ever since she arrived in this country with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. She stopped near a group of men in expensive suits. They were talking loudly about stocks and real estate. The kind of conversation that made her feel like she was listening to a foreign language. She held out her tray, offering champagne. One of the men took a glass without looking at her. Another waved her away like she was a fly buzzing around his head. The third one, a younger man with slicked back hair and a watch that probably cost more than her apartment, looked right through her as if she did not exist. Elena was used to this. In this world, servers were furniture. They were part of the background. No one wondered about their lives, their dreams, their stories. No one asked where they came from or what they had left behind. If they had asked Elena, she could have told them things that would have surprised them. She could have told them about the small apartment in Madrid where she grew up, about the old piano that sat in the corner of their living room, the one her mother had saved for years to buy. She could have told them about the first time she touched those keys, when she was just 5 years old, and how something inside her woke up that day. She could have told them about the hours of practice, the scales, the exercises, the pieces that made her fingers ache. She could have told them about her teacher, an old woman named Doña Lucia, who was strict and demanding but who saw something special in Elena. She could have told them about the Conservatorio Nacional, one of the best music schools in Spain. About the day she received her acceptance letter, and how her mother cried with joy. About the years of training, the competitions, the performances. About the night she played Chopin in front of 300 people and received a standing ovation. But Elena did not tell them any of this. She just smiled politely and moved on to the next group of guests. The truth was that life felt like it belonged to someone else now. A different Elena. A younger Elena. A version of herself that she had buried along with her mother 4 years ago. Her mother had gotten sick suddenly. One day she was fine, laughing, cooking, humming songs in the kitchen. The next day she was in the hospital, hooked up to machines, looking smaller than Elena had ever seen her. The doctors used words that Elena did not understand at first, but she understood enough. It was serious. It was expensive, and there was no guarantee. Elena dropped out of the conservatory to take care of her. She sold the piano, the same piano her mother had saved for years to buy, to pay for treatments. She worked 2 jobs, then 3. She did everything she could, but in the end, it was not enough. Her mother passed away on a Tuesday morning in spring. The windows were open, and Elena could hear birds singing outside. It seemed wrong, somehow, that the world could be so beautiful on the worst day of her life. After that, Elena could not stay in Madrid. Everything reminded her of what she had lost. The streets, the cafes, the sound of music drifting from open windows. She needed to start over somewhere new, somewhere far away, somewhere no one knew her story. So she packed a single suitcase, bought a one-way ticket, and left everything behind. Her friends, her teachers, her dreams. All of it. Now she was here. Serving champagne to strangers. Living in a tiny apartment with a roommate she barely spoke to. Working double shifts to pay rent. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was the life she had. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie in bed and think about music. She would hear melodies in her head, feel her fingers moving against the sheets as if they were keys. But she had not touched a piano since her mother's funeral. She could not bring herself to do it. The music was too connected to everything she had lost. Elena shook these thoughts away and focused on her work. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, smiled at guests who did not smile back. She was good at her job. Efficient, quiet, professional. Her manager liked her because she never complained, never caused problems, never drew attention to herself. That was exactly how Elena wanted it. The party continued around her. People laughed and danced. The string quartet played song after song. Margaret Hartwell floated through the crowd like a queen, making sure everyone was having a wonderful time. Richard Hartwell sat in a comfortable chair near the fireplace, surrounded by old friends who told stories about the old days. Elena watched them from across the room. She wondered what it felt like to have a life like that. To be surrounded by people who loved you. To have money and success and everything you could ever want. But then she reminded herself that everyone has their own struggles. Everyone carries pain that others cannot see. The richest person in the room might be the loneliest. The one laughing the loudest might be crying inside. She had learned this lesson the hard way. Around 9 o'clock, Elena took a short break. She stepped outside onto a small balcony and let the cold air fill her lungs. The city sparkled below her, thousands of lights like stars that had fallen to earth. She thought about her mother. About how proud she would have been to see Elena perform in places like this. Not as a server, but as a musician, as an artist. But that dream was gone now, packed away in a box she never opened. Hidden in a corner of her heart she tried not to visit. Elena took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and went back inside. The night was far from over. There was still work to do, and she had no idea that in just a few hours, everything was about to change. The party was going perfectly. Guests were happy. The food was delicious. The drinks were flowing. Margaret Hartwell looked around the room with satisfaction, knowing that all her months of planning had paid off. But then, around 10 o'clock, something went wrong. The event coordinator, a nervous woman with a clipboard who had been running around all night, suddenly rushed over to Margaret with panic in her eyes. She whispered something in Margaret's ear. Whatever she said, it made Margaret's face go pale. The pianist was not coming. His name was Anton Reyes, a well-known musician who had performed at dozens of high-profile events. Margaret had booked him 6 months in advance. He was supposed to arrive at 9:30, warm up, and then play during the cake ceremony at 11. It was going to be the highlight of the night. But Anton had called just minutes ago. His car had broken down 2 hours away. There was no way he could make it in time. He was very sorry, he said. These things happen, he said. Margaret felt her heart sink. The cake ceremony was the most important part of the evening. She had planned for Richard to blow out his candles while Anton played his favorite song, a beautiful piece by Debussy that reminded Richard of his early days in the music business. It was supposed to be emotional and meaningful. Now, there would be no music. Just awkward silence, while an old man blew out candles on a cake. The event coordinator asked what they should do. Margaret did not know. She looked around the room desperately, hoping for some kind of solution to appear out of thin air. That was when a young man at one of the tables stood up. His name was Vincent, the son of one of Richard's old business partners. He was in his late 20s, wearing an expensive suit that did not quite fit right. He had been drinking heavily all night, and his face was flushed red. He had heard the conversation between Margaret and the coordinator. "I can play," he announced loudly, loud enough for the people around him to hear. "I took lessons when I was a kid. How hard can it be?" His friends laughed and cheered him on. Someone slapped him on the back. Another person shouted for him to do it. Margaret hesitated. She did not want a drunk young man banging on the piano at her husband's birthday party. But she also did not want silence. And Vincent was already walking toward the grand Steinway in the corner of the room, waving to the crowd like he was some kind of celebrity. The piano was beautiful. A true Steinway, worth more than most cars. It had been rented specifically for Anton to play. The keys were polished, the wood gleaming under the lights. Vincent sat down on the bench, cracked his knuckles dramatically, and placed his hands on the keys. Then he started to play. It was bad, really bad. He tried to play Happy Birthday, but his fingers kept hitting the wrong notes. He laughed at his own mistakes, which only made it worse. The melody was choppy and off-key. It sounded like a child who had never had a lesson in his life. Some guests laughed along with him, thinking it was funny. Others winced and looked away. A few older guests, the ones who actually knew music, shook their heads in disappointment. Richard Hartwell sat in his chair by the fireplace, watching with a polite smile on his face. But if you looked closely, you could see the sadness in his eyes. This man had spent his entire life surrounded by beautiful music. He had discovered some of the greatest talents of his generation. And now, at his own birthday party, he was listening to this. Margaret stood near the back of the room, her hands clasped together, trying not to cry. Vincent finished his performance with a dramatic flourish, hitting the keys one last time before throwing his hands in the air. His friends clapped and whistled. A few other guests offered polite applause. But most people were just relieved it was over. Vincent stood up and took a bow, nearly losing his balance. Then he stumbled back to his table, laughing with his friends about what a great job he had done. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. People returned to their conversations, but the mood had shifted. Something special had been ruined. Elena had watched the whole thing from the side of the room. She had been collecting empty glasses when Vincent started playing. And from the first note, she felt something twist inside her chest. It was not just that he was bad. It was that he did not care. He treated the piano like a toy, like a joke, like something to show off with, not something to respect. To Elena, that piano was sacred. Music was sacred. It was the thing that had given her life meaning for so many years. It was the thing that connected her to her mother, and watching someone treat it so carelessly made her feel sick. But she said nothing. She kept her face neutral, her eyes down. She was just a waitress. Her opinions did not matter here. She turned to walk away, to continue her work, when she heard someone laughing behind her. "Hey, look at her." Elena froze. The waitress. Look at how she's staring at that piano. She turned slowly and saw two men standing near a high table. They were both in their 30s, wearing suits that screamed money. One of them had a cruel smile on his face. The other was holding a champagne glass, swirling it lazily. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" the first one said. "You look like someone just insulted your grandmother." His friend laughed. "Maybe she's never seen a piano before. Probably doesn't even know what it is." 1. More laughter. A woman nearby heard them and giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Elena felt heat rise to her face. Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell them that she had probably forgotten more about piano than they would ever know. She wanted to tell them about the conservatory, the competitions, the standing ovations. But she did not. Because what would be the point? They would not believe her. And even if they did, it would not change anything. She would still be the waitress. They would still be the guests. The world would keep spinning exactly as it always had. So Elena lowered her eyes, turned around, and walked away. The two men laughed again, louder this time, pleased with themselves. "That's what I thought," one of them said. Elena kept walking. Her face was burning, her heart was pounding. But she did not look back. She would not give them the satisfaction. She found a quiet corner near the kitchen and set down her tray. Her hands were shaking. She took a deep breath, then another. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she did not care, but that was a lie. It did matter. It always had. No matter how hard she tried to bury her past, no matter how many walls she built around her heart. Moments like this always found a way to break through. She missed music. She missed performing. She missed the feeling of sitting at a piano and letting everything else disappear. She missed her mother. She missed being seen. Elena closed her eyes and pressed her back against the wall. The sounds of the party continued around her. Laughter. Conversation. The clinking of glasses. But to her, it all sounded far away, like she was underwater. She stayed there for a long moment, just breathing, and then she straightened up, fixed her uniform, and picked up her tray again. There was still work to do. There was always work to do. But somewhere inside her, something had shifted. A door that had been locked for 4 years was starting to crack open. And she did not know whether to be terrified or hopeful. All she knew was that this night was not over yet. Elena returned to work, moving through the crowd with her tray of champagne glasses. She smiled when she needed to smile. She nodded politely when guests spoke to her. She did everything right, just like always. But inside, she was somewhere else entirely. The laughter of those 2 men kept echoing in her head. The way they had looked at her. Like she was nothing. Like she was less than nothing. She had spent years building walls around herself, telling herself that the opinions of strangers did not matter. But tonight, those walls felt thin. She thought about her mother. About what she would say if she could see Elena now. Her mother had always believed in her so deeply, so completely. She used to say that Elena had magic in her fingers, that when she played, angels stopped to listen. What would her mother think if she saw her daughter serving drinks to people who treated her like furniture? Elena shook the thought away. It did not help to think like this. The past was the past. Her mother was gone. The music was gone. This was her life now. And she needed to accept it. She was heading back toward the kitchen when she noticed something happening near the center of the room. Margaret Hartwell was standing alone by a tall flower arrangement. Her back was to most of the guests, and her shoulders were shaking slightly. At first, Elena thought she might be laughing, but then Margaret lifted a hand to her face, and Elena realized the truth. She was crying. Elena hesitated. It was not her place to get involved. Margaret was the host. A wealthy woman who lived in a completely different world. What could a waitress possibly say to comfort her? But something made Elena stop. Maybe it was the way Margaret's shoulders trembled. Maybe it was the loneliness in that image. A woman crying alone, in the middle of her own party. Or maybe it was because Elena knew exactly what it felt like to put on a brave face while your heart was breaking. Before she could think about it too much, Elena walked over. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly. "Is everything okay? Can I get you anything?" Margaret turned quickly, surprised. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to smile. "Oh. No. I'm fine. Thank you. Just a little overwhelmed, that's all." Elena nodded. She should have walked away then. She had done her duty. Asked if the guest needed help. That was enough. But she did not walk away. "It's a beautiful party," Elena said. "Your husband seems very happy." Margaret laughed, but it was a sad laugh. "He's being polite. Richard is always polite. But I know him better than anyone. I saw his face when that young man was playing the piano." She shook her head. "Music means everything to him. His whole life has been about music. And I wanted tonight to be special. I wanted him to hear something beautiful." Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked down at her hands, embarrassed. Elena felt something shift in her chest. She understood that feeling. The desperate need to give someone you love something meaningful. The pain when it does not work out. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly. "That must be very disappointing." Margaret looked up at her. Really looked at her. Maybe for the first time all night. There was something different in her eyes now. Not the distant politeness of a host looking at a server, something more real. "What's your name?" Margaret asked. "Elena." "Elena." Margaret repeated the name like she was tasting it. "That's a beautiful name. Where are you from?" "Spain. Madrid." Margaret nodded slowly. She studied Elena's face for a long moment, as if searching for something. Then she asked a question that made Elena's heart stop. "Do you play piano, Elena?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena felt the world shrink down to just this moment. Just this woman standing in front of her with tears still wet on her cheeks. She could lie. She could say no and walk away. She could protect herself, keep her walls up, stay invisible. That would be the safe thing to do. But when she opened her mouth, the truth came out instead. "I used to." Margaret's eyes widened. "You did? Were you any good?" Elena paused. How do you answer a question like that? How do you explain years of training, thousands of hours of practice, the feeling of losing yourself completely in the music? "I was," Elena said finally. "A long time ago." Margaret grabbed her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Would you play for us? Please? It would mean so much to Richard. To me." Elena felt panic rise in her throat. I can't. I haven't played in years. I don't even know if I remember how." "Please," Margaret said again. Her voice was trembling. "I know I'm asking a lot. I know you don't know me. But I can see something in your eyes, Elena. Something real. I don't think you've forgotten how to play. I think you're just afraid." The words hit Elena like a punch. Because they were true. She was afraid. Terrified, actually. The piano was not just an instrument to her. It was a door to everything she had lost. And she was not sure she could open that door without falling apart. "It's been 4 years," Elena whispered. "Since I touched a piano. Since my mother." She could not finish the sentence. Margaret's expression softened. She squeezed Elena's hand gently. "I lost my mother too. 20 years ago. And there are still days when I miss her so much. I can barely breathe." Too. Elena looked at this woman, this wealthy stranger in her expensive dress, and suddenly the distance between them did not seem so great. Grief was grief. Loss was loss. It did not care how much money you had or what kind of clothes you wore. "Music was how I connected with her," Elena said. "She sacrificed everything so I could learn. When she died, I couldn't. I just couldn't." Margaret nodded. "I understand. I really do." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But maybe tonight could be different. Maybe tonight, instead of running from the memory, you could play for her. Honor her. Let her hear you one more time." Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. She looked across the room at the grand piano sitting in the corner. It was so beautiful, so familiar, and so terrifying. Could she really do this? After everything? After all these years? She thought about the 2 men who had laughed at her. She thought about Vincent and his careless, sloppy playing. She thought about Richard Hartwell, sitting alone by the fireplace, missing the music that had defined his life. And she thought about her mother. Her kind eyes, her gentle voice, the way she used to sit beside Elena on the piano bench and hum along as Elena practiced. "Play for her," she could almost hear her mother say. "One more time, mi amor." Elena took a deep breath. Her whole body was trembling. But she looked at Margaret and nodded. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." Margaret's face lit up. She hugged Elena quickly, then stepped back and wiped her eyes again. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Elena set down her tray on a nearby table. She smoothed her uniform with shaking hands. And then she started walking toward the piano. The room did not notice her at first. People were still talking, laughing, drinking. They had no idea what was about to happen. The 2 men who had mocked her were still standing near their table. One of them saw her walking toward the piano and nudged his friend. They both smirked, already preparing for another joke. Elena ignored them. She kept her eyes forward. One step, then another. The piano seemed both very close and very far away at the same time. When she reached it, she stopped. The bench was right there, waiting for her. The keys gleamed under the lights. She sat down slowly. The bench felt familiar beneath her, like an old friend she had not seen in years. Elena placed her hands above the keys. They were shaking badly. She could feel dozens of eyes starting to turn toward her. She could hear the whispers beginning. The room was getting quieter now. People were noticing, watching, waiting. Elena closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's face, her mother's voice, her mother's love. And then, for the first time in 4 years, she began to play. The first note rang out into the room like a drop of water falling into a still pond. It was soft, gentle, almost hesitant. Elena's fingers trembled as they touched the keys. And for a moment, she was not sure she could do this. 4 years was a long time, maybe too long. Maybe the music was gone forever, buried along with everything else she had lost. But then something strange happened. Her fingers remembered. The second note came easier than the first, and the third easier still. It was like her hands had been waiting all this time, holding onto the music even when her heart had tried to let it go. She was playing Chopin. Ballade, no. 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. It was also the last piece she had performed before her mother got sick. She had not planned to play it tonight. She had not planned anything. But somehow, her fingers found their way to those familiar notes, and she let them lead. The room began to change. At first, people barely noticed. A few guests glanced over at the piano, expecting another awkward performance like the one from earlier. They saw the waitress sitting there and raised their eyebrows. Some of them smiled, ready to be amused. But then the music started to build. The opening of the ballade is quiet and searching, like someone wandering through a dark forest looking for a path. Elena played these notes with her eyes closed, feeling each one deep in her chest. Her hands moved across the keys like they had never stopped. Like the 4 years of silence had been nothing but a bad dream. The whispers in the room began to fade. One by one, conversations stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Feet stopped moving on the dance floor. People were listening. The 2 men who had mocked Elena earlier were standing near their table, champagne in hand. When they first saw her sit down at the piano, they had exchanged knowing looks. Another embarrassment waiting to happen, they thought, another joke. But now their smiles were gone. The one who had called her sweetheart was staring at the piano with his mouth slightly open. His friend had set down his glass and was gripping the edge of the table. They did not understand what they were hearing. This was not possible. This was a waitress. A server. Someone who carried trays and cleaned up after people like them. How could she play like this? But she could. She was. The music grew stronger. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, sometimes crashing, sometimes gentle. Elena leaned into the piano, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She was not thinking anymore. She was not afraid. She was just playing, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt like herself again. Margaret Hartwell stood near the back of the room, her hand pressed against her heart. Tears were streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. She did not even notice them. All she could do was watch and listen. This was what she had wanted. This was what she had dreamed of for her husband's birthday. Not just music, but real music. The kind that reaches inside you and touches something you cannot name. The kind that makes you remember every beautiful and painful moment of your life all at once. She looked over at Richard. Her husband was still sitting in his chair by the fireplace. But he was not relaxed anymore. He had straightened up, his whole body leaning forward. His eyes were fixed on Elena with an intensity that Margaret had not seen in years. Richard Hartwell had spent his entire career listening to musicians. He had heard thousands of performances, discovered dozens of talents, built an empire on his ability to recognize greatness when he heard it. And right now, he was hearing greatness. This woman, this unknown waitress in a black uniform, was playing Chopin better than 90% of the professionals he had worked with. Her technique was flawless. Her interpretation was mature and emotional. But more than that, there was something in her playing that could not be taught. Something raw and honest and deeply human. She was not just playing notes. She was telling a story. Her story, The ballade reached its middle section, where the music becomes tender and nostalgic. Elena felt tears building behind her closed eyes. She thought about her mother, about the way she used to stand in the doorway of their small apartment and listen while Elena practiced, about the pride in her eyes at every recital, about the last time they had sat together at the piano. Just weeks before she went to the hospital, a tear slipped down Elena's cheek and fell onto her hand. She kept playing. The guests in the room were frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the servers had stopped working, standing along the walls with their trays, watching in disbelief. One of them, a young woman who had worked beside Elena for 2 years, had her hand over her mouth. She had no idea. None of them had any idea. The music built toward its climax. This was the part of the ballade that separated good pianists from great ones. The notes came faster, more intense, demanding everything from the performer. Elena's fingers flew across the keys. Her whole body was engaged now, shoulders moving, head tilting, feet working the pedals. She was not in the hotel ballroom anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. A place where time did not exist, where grief and joy mixed together into something beautiful, where her mother was still alive and listening from across the room. The final section of the ballade is triumphant and heartbreaking at the same time. It sounds like someone fighting through pain to find hope. Like someone saying goodbye, but also refusing to let go. Elena played these final passages with everything she had. Every loss, every struggle, every lonely night in her tiny apartment. Every time she had been ignored or dismissed, or treated like nothing. Every memory of her mother, good and bad, happy and sad. She poured it all into the music, and the music gave it back to her, transformed into something larger than herself. The final notes rang out, loud and clear and full of emotion. Elena held them for a long moment, letting them echo through the room. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. The kind that feels almost sacred. Elena blinked, suddenly aware of where she was. She looked out at the crowd, at all these wealthy strangers in their expensive clothes, and she felt exposed, vulnerable, like she had just shown them her soul and was waiting to see if they would accept it or laugh at it. For one terrible moment, no one moved. And then Richard Hartwell rose from his chair. He was 70 years old. He had a bad knee and a back that complained every morning. But he stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on Elena, and he began to clap. The sound broke the silence like a stone breaking glass. Margaret joined him immediately, clapping through her tears. Then another guest stood. Then another. Then a whole table at once. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The applause was thunderous. People were not just clapping politely. They were cheering. Some of them were crying. The young woman who had mocked Elena alongside Vincent covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. The 2 men who had laughed at her earlier were standing now too. But they were not laughing anymore. One of them looked down at the floor, unable to meet Elena's eyes. The other just stared at her, his face pale, like he had just witnessed something he would never be able to explain. Elena sat at the piano bench, trembling. She did not know what to do. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times when she was younger, dreaming of standing ovations and cheering crowds. But this was different. This was real, and it was almost too much to take in. Margaret pushed through the crowd and rushed toward her. She pulled Elena into a tight hug, still crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Elena hugged her back. She could not speak. There were no words for what she was feeling. When Margaret finally let go, Elena looked out at the crowd again. They were still clapping, still standing, still looking at her like she was something extraordinary. And for the first time in 4 years, Elena allowed herself to believe that maybe she was. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Elena remained seated at the piano, her hands resting in her lap, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She did not know what to do. She did not know where to look. Everything felt like a dream. The kind you are afraid to wake up from because reality could never be this good. Slowly, the clapping began to fade. People returned to their seats, wiping their eyes, shaking their heads in amazement. But they kept glancing at Elena, whispering to each other, pointing at the woman in the black uniform, who had just turned their entire evening upside down. Elena started to stand. She thought maybe she should go back to work, pick up her tray, disappear into the background where she belonged. But before she could move, she saw someone walking toward her. It was Richard Hartwell. The old man moved slowly, carefully. But there was purpose in every step. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. His eyes never left Elena's face. When he reached the piano, he stopped. For a long moment, he just looked at her. His expression was hard to read. There was surprise there, certainly. But also something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. "Young lady," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Who are you?" Elena swallowed hard. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I work here." "I'm a server." Richard shook his head slowly. "No, that's not what I asked. Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that?" Elena hesitated. She could feel dozens of eyes watching them. The room had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear. "I studied at the Conservatorio Nacional," she said, "in Madrid, a long time ago." Richard's eyebrows rose. The Conservatorio was one of the finest music schools in Europe. He knew it well. He had discovered two of his most successful artists there. Decades ago. "Why did you leave?" he asked. The question was simple. But the answer was not. Elena felt her throat tighten. She thought about lying, making up some easy excuse. But after what had just happened, after the music she had just shared, she could not bring herself to hide anymore. "My mother got sick," she said quietly. "I had to take care of her. I dropped out. Sold everything. Did what I could." She paused. "It wasn't enough. She passed away 4 years ago." Richard was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "And you haven't played since then?" Elena shook her head. "Not until tonight." Richard let out a long breath. He turned and looked at Margaret, who was standing nearby with tears still streaming down her face. Something passed between them. A silent conversation that only people who have been married for decades can have. Then Richard turned back to Elena. "I have spent my entire life looking for talent," he said. "Real talent. The kind that cannot be taught. Only discovered. I have found it maybe a dozen times in 50 years. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Elena was not sure she did. She just stared at him, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. Richard reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. "What you just did," he said, "was one of the most beautiful things I have ever heard. And I have heard a lot." Elena felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She could not stop them. She did not even try. "You have a gift," Richard continued. "A rare and precious gift. And I don't know what happened to bring you here tonight. To this hotel. To that piano. But I don't believe in accidents. I believe things happen for a reason." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. He pressed it into Elena's hand. "This is my personal number," he said. "I want you to call me tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about." Elena looked down at the card. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely read it. But she saw his name printed there, along with a phone number, and suddenly the reality of what was happening hit her all at once. This was not a dream. This was real. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Richard smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind that made his whole face soften. "Say you'll call. Say you'll give yourself a chance. That's all I ask." Elena nodded. She clutched the card like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Because right now, to her, it was. Margaret stepped forward and hugged Elena again. "Thank you for saving my husband's birthday," she said. "And thank you for reminding me what real courage looks like." Elena hugged her back, unable to speak. The rest of the night passed in a blur. People kept coming up to Elena, shaking her hand, telling her how moved they were. The other servers stared at her with wide eyes, full of questions they were too shocked to ask. Even her manager, who was usually strict and distant, pulled her aside and told her to take the rest of the night off. Elena wandered through the party in a daze. She accepted compliments she did not know how to respond to. She smiled at strangers who suddenly wanted to know everything about her. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. At some point, she found herself standing near the tall windows that overlooked the city. The lights sparkled below like a sea of stars. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and tried to catch her breath. That was when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw one of the men who had mocked her earlier. He was alone now. His friend was nowhere in sight. He looked different than before. Smaller, somehow. Less sure of himself. He stopped a few feet away from her and cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize," he said. His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "For what I said earlier, it was rude and stupid and wrong. I'm sorry." Elena studied his face. She could see that the apology was genuine. He was not just saying words. He actually meant them. She thought about how angry she had been earlier. How humiliated. How much his laughter had hurt. She could hold on to that anger if she wanted to. She could make him feel small, the way he had made her feel. But what would be the point? "It's okay," she said. "We all make mistakes." The man nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you. And for what it's worth, that was incredible. What you did up there. I've never heard anything like it." Elena smiled slightly. "Thank you for saying that." He nodded again, awkwardly, and then walked away. Elena watched him go, feeling something release in her chest. Something she had been carrying for a long time without even realizing it. Forgiveness, she thought. It really does set you free. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at a concert hall downtown. She was wearing a beautiful black dress that Margaret had helped her pick out. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Her hands were trembling, but this time it was excitement, not fear. The Hartwell Foundation for Emerging Artists had sponsored her comeback concert. Richard had made some calls, pulled some strings, and suddenly doors that had been closed for years were flying open. Elena had a manager now, and a practice space, and a future that looked nothing like the one she had imagined just a few months ago. She peeked through the curtain at the audience. The seats were almost full. She saw Margaret in the front row, beaming with pride. She saw colleagues from the hotel who had come to support her. She even saw the man who had apologized that night. He had bought a ticket and was sitting near the back, waiting quietly. But there was one face Elena was looking for that she knew she would not find. Her mother was not there. She would never be there again. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The grief, the struggle, the years of feeling invisible, and then the birthday party, the piano, the chance she almost did not take. She whispered softly, so quietly that no one else could hear, "This is for you, Mama. I hope you're listening." Then she walked out onto the stage, sat down at the piano, and began to play. The music filled the hall, beautiful and powerful and full of life. And somewhere, Elena believed, her mother was listening. She had never really left. She had been there all along, waiting for Elena to find her way back to the music. And now, finally, she had.